At the U.S. Army Ordnance Proving Grounds in Aberdeen, Maryland, the winter of 1944 arrived not with silence, but with the echo of hammers and the whisper of doubt. Rows of half-assembled tanks stood like sleeping giants beneath the rafters of Building 311. Olive-drab steel, cold ambition, and the uneasy hum of a war still far from over. Here, amid the hiss of welding torches and the rhythmic slam of hydraulic presses, a quiet revolution was taking shape, one born not from triumph, but from desperation, the uncomfortable truth for years. The M4 Sherman had been America's symbol of armored might. Reliable, mass-producible, easy to repair, a machine built not for glory but for victory through numbers. In North Africa, it had outrun the desert. In Sicily, it had carried infantry across fire and stone. The Sherman was the workhorse of the Allied advance, until it met something it couldn't outrun. By mid-1944, the reports from Normandy began to bleed through the optimism. Letters, after-action memos, casualty lists, words like outgunned, outclassed, and hopeless. One field memo from the 2nd Armored Division, pinned to a corkboard in the Ordnance Analysis section, read coldly, "Enemy tanks open fire at ranges exceeding 1,500 yards. Shermans cannot reply effectively beyond 800. Penetrations are frequent, even on the frontal glacis," and scrawled in pencil across the margin, one line that summed up the crisis. "We're outclassed, the shadow of the Panther." The enemy's name was whispered with reluctant respect. Panzerkampfwagen V, the Panther. It was fast, lethal, and precise, a predator forged in desperation and refined in blood. With its long 75mm KWK-42 gun and 80mm sloped frontal armor, the Panther could destroy a Sherman before the Americans even saw it. At 1,500 yards, the Panther's shell struck with surgical precision. The Sherman's 75mm M3, by contrast, was nearly useless beyond 800 yards. Tank crews soon learned a bitter truth. Courage meant little when the laws of physics were against you. At Aberdeen, Colonel Joseph Kirby, head of the tank automotive branch, studied a cross-section of the Panther's cannon. His voice, heavy with disbelief, broke the silence. 75mm, high-velocity L-70. Their shell leaves the barrel at over 3,000 feet per second. He looked up at his engineers. "Gentlemen, our 75mm M3 is an antique." The words stung because they were true. The doctrine of numbers. The Sherman was not a failure of engineering. It was a triumph of doctrine, General Leslie J. McNair's doctrine. McNair believed in mobility, logistics, and overwhelming numbers. "Heavy tanks," he said, "are wasteful and unnecessary. We will win through movement, not mass." It was a belief that made sense on paper, in the wide deserts of North Africa, where the Sherman's speed mattered more than its armor. But in Normandy's hedgerows, where every hill concealed a German gun, that doctrine turned deadly. Captured German intelligence reports confirmed what tankers already knew. American armor is tactically inferior. The Sherman is fast, yes, but undergunned. Panther engages freely at long range. One Panther may engage 4 or 5 Shermans before withdrawal. In Washington, the doctrine remained unshaken. In Europe, it was costing lives. The engineers of Aberdeen. At Aberdeen, the engineers worked in silence that winter. The air reeked of oil and burnt metal. Frost clung to the windows. Sleep was a luxury, and urgency a constant companion. They weren't politicians. They were problem solvers, and their problem was simple. America needed a tank that could kill a Panther. The prototypes had already begun, T-20, T-23, T-25, each an evolutionary step away from the Sherman. Wider hulls, torsion bar suspension, thicker armor. The T-25 carried something new, a 90mm cannon adapted from an anti-aircraft gun. The M1 on paper, it could pierce a Panther's front plate at over 1,200 yards. But paper doesn't win wars. And in Washington, General McNair's ghost still haunted every design meeting. Heavy tanks will slow operations. We need reliable tanks in quantity, not superweapons. Even as field reports poured in from France describing Shermans burning in the bocage, production of the M4 continued, while the engineers at Aberdeen built their answer in secret. Lacking physics, in July 1944, an engineer named Robert Kellner returned from France. He'd spoken to men from the 3rd Armored Division, tankers who'd stared into the eyes of the Panther and lived to tell the tale. His report was grim. Our tankers call it the murder cat. They can't flank fast enough. Our 75s bounce off its front plate. We lose 5 for every one we destroy. Kellner placed a spent 75-meter shell casing on the table. The nose was flattened like a coin. This hit a Panther at 900 yards, he said quietly. It left a mark, nothing more. On the wall behind him, a photograph flickered to life. A Sherman, turret blown off, white star scorched black. Our boys aren't lacking courage, Kellner said. They're lacking physics. That phrase, lacking physics, went spread through Aberdeen like wildfire. The men understood. It wasn't bravery they were short on. It was velocity, armor, and time. The moment of realization. General Gladian Barnes, Chief of Ordnance, arrived at Aberdeen in September 1944. He was not a man for ceremony. He wanted results. That morning, the engineers rolled out the prototype 90mm cannon, designation M3, and mounted it on a reinforced hull. Barnes watched silently as the weapon thundered across the test range. The shell struck a steel block, 5 inches thick, angled to mimic a Panther's armor. The block shattered. Barnes turned to his men and said simply, "There, that's our answer." The answer had a name, T-26E3, soon to be known as the M26 Pershing. But the battle to get it approved would be fought not in the mud of France, but in the corridors of bureaucracy, politics, and physics. In Washington, the resistance was fierce. Shipping officers complained about transport weight. Logistics planners warned it would strain supply lines. The war will be over before it's ready, some said. But on the front lines, men were dying. A cable from Eisenhower's headquarters arrived at the War Department. Combat experience clearly demonstrates the need for tanks superior in firepower and protection. Our current models are no longer adequate. It was as blunt as it was damning. Even the 12th Army Group's after-action reports left no room for optimism. The Panther outclasses the Sherman in all aspects except reliability. For the first time, even the bureaucrats could not ignore the arithmetic of destruction. In France, tank crews fought with courage. In Maryland, engineers fought with mathematics. Both were battles of survival, the birth of the Pershing. By December 1944, the urgency had turned into obsession. The sheds at Aberdeen burned with light even after midnight. Men measured armor plates by flashlight, welding seams with frost on their breath. Every rivet, every bolt, every hour saved might mean one fewer Sherman burning in Europe. One night, as the cold wind rattled the hangar doors, the test gun roared again. The new 90mm cannon spoke, a sound like thunder over steel. When the smoke cleared, the engineers approached the target. A 5-inch German armor plate salvaged from a wrecked Panther. The shell had gone clean through. Silence fell over the room. Then one voice broke it, soft but certain. "Gentlemen, we can kill it." The end of the Sherman's era. By the time the first Pershings rolled off the line, it was already 1945. The war's final winter had arrived. In the forests of the Ardennes, American tank crews still fought with courage, and with 75mm guns that could not pierce German armor. "We hit them 5 times before they hit us once," one tanker wrote home. The difference is one of theirs is enough. At Aberdeen, the engineers read that letter in silence. They knew what they had built. They also knew it had come too late for many. The Pershing's birth would be measured not just in steel and blueprints, but in blood already spilled across the fields of France. As the war's final battles loomed, one thought echoed across every hangar and every heart. America will never again send her tankers to fight against physics. The era of the Sherman was ending. The age of the Pershing was about to begin. The Panther's reign, steel, fire, and fear, Eastern France. Summer, 1944. Morning haze clung low over the rolling fields near Chartres, veiling the dark silhouettes of German armor crouched among the hedgerows. In the soft mist, the beasts of the Panzerwaffe waited. Sleek, angular, predatory, the Panther, Germany's lion of Europe, its long 75mm gun pointed west toward the approaching rumble of American columns. Somewhere beyond the mist, Shermans were coming. The hunter in the mist. Inside the steel belly of one of those Panthers, Oberfeldwebel Karl Hoffmann of the 2nd Panzer Division adjusted his Zeiss binoculars, peering through the haze. He spotted movement, dark specks crawling toward the horizon. He lowered the lenses and muttered a single word under his breath. Shermans. To his crew, it was both recognition and reassurance. The men of the Wehrmacht had fought these American tanks before. They knew the numbers, the weaknesses, the pattern. The Panther was more than a machine. It was a creed, the belief that German engineering could still shape fate, even as the Reich began to crumble. The myth of invincibility. When Adolf Hitler unleashed the Panther at Kursk in 1943, it was meant to be the weapon that restored German supremacy, a response to the Soviet T-34, and a symbol of vengeance. The first models had faltered. Engines overheated. Transmissions cracked. Entire units broke down before reaching the front. But the design had potential, and German engineers refined it with relentless precision. By 1944, the Panther Ausf G had become the Wehrmacht's deadliest weapon. A perfect marriage of speed, protection, and firepower. Its 75mm KWK-42 L-70 cannon could pierce 120 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters, enough to destroy any Allied tank long before they could reply. Its sloped 80mm glasses deflected even direct hits. The Allies feared it. The Germans worshipped it, and yet the Panther carried a curse. It demanded perfection from the machine and from the men inside it, baptism by fire. At the edge of a Norman village, Lieutenant Erich Brandt crouched behind the sight of his Panther. Ahead of him, a column of American Shermans moved cautiously through the smoke of burning farmhouses. Range, 1,400 meters, his gunner whispered. Target lead tank. Brandt gave a single nod. The cannon barked. The recoil jolted the entire machine. Through the scope, the first Sherman exploded, turret lifting off like a coin flipped by a giant hand. Next target. Another shot. Another kill. Within 60 seconds, 2 Shermans were burning. The crew cheered softly in the cramped steel compartment. But outside, the air was changing. For every Panther that scored a kill, 2 others broke down. For every German victory, 10 more Allied tanks crossed the channel. The price of perfection. The Panther was beautiful and fragile. Its complex transmission system was built for precision, not punishment. Its final drive gears, delicate, over-engineered, shattered under sudden torque. For the Germans, every tank lost to breakdown was a tank they couldn't replace. For the Americans, every Sherman lost was simply replaced by another. Germany could build 6 Panthers a day. America could build 20 Shermans an hour. The numbers told a quiet, devastating truth, and the Panther could win battles, but it could not win a war. The eyes of the enemy captured documents later revealed the fear that ran through Allied briefings. American tankers described the Panther in chilling detail. You don't see it first. You hear it, like a growl through the fog, then the flash and you're gone. To face a Panther head-on was suicide. The only hope was to flank it, to strike its weaker sides or rear. But in the tight-hedged fields of Normandy, that was often impossible. As one U.S. tanker wrote bitterly, "We go into battle knowing some of us won't make it back. We just pray we're not the first target." Even air superiority wasn't always enough. When the skies were clear, thunderbolts and typhoons hunted the Panthers mercilessly. But when clouds rolled in, when the fog thickened, the ground belonged to the German cats. The Eastern Front echo many. Panther crews in France were veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had faced the endless waves of T-34s, who had fought in the ruins of Kursk and Kharkov. They carried those ghosts with them. In their diaries, they wrote not of ideology, but of survival. "The Panther is our only hope," one gunner wrote in August 1944. "We fear its breakdown more than enemy fire." The machine was their protector and their executioner. When it ran perfectly, it was unstoppable. When it faltered, it trapped its crew inside a coffin of steel. And yet, even as German fuel reserves dwindled, as the Allies poured across France, the legend of the Panther grew, part truth, part desperation. The Americans strike back in Maryland. The Americans had been listening. Every shattered Sherman, every burned-out husk sent back fragments of knowledge, armor angles, impact marks, penetration patterns. By late 1944, the M26 Pershing was no longer just a prototype. It was a promise, codenamed the Zebra Mission. 20 Pershings were prepared for combat testing in Europe. Too few, too late. but enough to make a statement. As they crossed the Atlantic, American tankers whispered rumors. They're sending a new tank, one that can kill a panther. The men wanted to believe, but on the front, the panther still ruled. The final winter. The winter of 1944-45 brought the Ardennes offensive, Hitler's last gamble. In the snow and fog of the Battle of the Bulge, the Panther made its final stand. Disguised in American markings, German Panthers spearheaded the surprise attack. In the forests around Bastogne and St. Vith, they struck deep into Allied lines. For a moment it seemed as though the old magic had returned. American units fell back, convoys burned, confusion reigned. But this time, logistics, fuel, and attrition caught up with the Reich's machines. When the skies cleared, Allied aircraft descended like hawks. Panthers burned by the dozen, their engines seized, their crews fleeing on foot through the snow. The hunter had become the hunted, the fall of the lion. By January 1945, fewer than 400 Panthers remained on the Western Front. Many sat immobilized or out of fuel, out of parts, out of time. For every operational Panther, there were 3 more awaiting repair. German mechanics stripped one to keep another alive, a cannibal army of machines. And yet, even in defeat, the Panther commanded awe. Captured by the Allies, examined by engineers, it was clear this was no ordinary tank. It was art, a terrible, brilliant creation that embodied both the genius and the madness of Nazi Germany. The turning of the tide. When the Pershings finally arrived in Europe, they did not come as prototypes, they came as avengers. Each one carried the lessons written in the fire and blood of Normandy. Their 90mm guns could pierce the Panther's armor. Their thicker plating could withstand its return fire. For the first time in the war, American tank crews faced the enemy as equals. The age of imbalance was ending. The field of steel and death that had once belonged to the Panther was about to change hands. The end of an era. In the frozen fields of the Ardennes, surrounded by the wreckage of his comrades, a Panther commander once wrote in his notebook, "We are lions in cages of ice. Our claws are sharp, but our strength is gone." By the spring of 1945, the Panthers that remained were ghosts, magnificent relics of a war that had consumed its own creators. And across the Rhine, a new sound began to echo, deeper, steadier, unstoppable. The rumble of the M26 Pershing. Rolling toward Cologne, the hunter's reign was ending. The balance of power had shifted. The Panther gave Germany pride. The Pershing gave America parity. The battle of steel was far from over. But for the first time in years, the Allies were no longer fighting against physics. They were fighting as equals. Duel in the Ruins, March 6, 1945. Cologne, Germany. Once one of Europe's most beautiful cities, now a graveyard of concrete and smoke. The cathedral still stands, defiant among ruins. Around it, the last defenders of the Reich prepare to fight to the very end. Among them, a single Panther tank. And rolling toward it, the machine that would end an era, the American M26 Pershing. This is their story. The dying city. The war had finally reached the German homeland. After years of pushing eastward, the Allies had crossed the Rhine, and now the ancient city of Cologne lay in their path. For months, Allied bombers had pounded it without mercy. Factories, bridges, homes, everything reduced to dust. The people who remained lived in basements, listening to the earth shake above them. But even in defeat, the Wehrmacht fought on. Every street, every corner, every ruined building became a fortress, and somewhere among the shattered blocks, the last Panther waited. The last Panther. The tank was Panther 232, commanded by Sergeant Wilhelm Bartelborth. He was 24 years old, a veteran of the Eastern Front, hardened by 3 years of war. His Panther sat concealed beside a collapsed building near the train station, its barrel trained on the main road leading into the city square. Fuel was scarce. Ammunition was low. But morale, it was made of iron. "We'll make them pay for every meter," Bartelborth told his crew. "If we fall here, we fall standing." Outside, the sound of engines grew louder. American armor was approaching. The Pershing arrives. Advancing from the west was the 3rd Armored Division, Spearhead. At its tip, a brand new machine rolled through the ruins, one of only a handful in Europe. The M26 Pershing, Serial number 38. Commanded by Lieutenant Robert Early, the Pershing crew was young, confident, and eager to test their tank in real combat. It was heavier than the Sherman, better armored, better armed, with a powerful 90mm M3 gun that could match anything the Germans had left. For the first time, American crews felt they could go head-to-head with the feared Panther, not just survive, but win the ambush. At exactly 12:30 p.m., the Pershing rumbled into the open square. Ahead stood the ruins of Cologne's train station. To their left, the shadow of the cathedral, and somewhere in that maze of rubble, the Panther waited. Through the commander's periscope, Lieutenant Early scanned the street. Dust swirled in the cold March air. No movement, then a flicker of motion. A gun barrel just visible between two crumbling walls. "Panther, 11 o'clock, shouted the gunner. "Range 800 meters! The Pershing's turret began to traverse, but the Panther fired first. The first shot. The Panther's shell screamed across the square, striking the corner of a nearby building, just meters from the Pershing. The explosion showered the American tank with debris. Inside, Lieutenant Early barked an order. "Traverse left. Fire!" The Pershing's 90mm gun roared. The shell streaked across the open space, hitting the Panther's glacis plate. Sparks flew, but the armor held. The Panther reversed slightly, repositioning behind the rubble. Then it fired again. This time, the round struck the Pershing's mantlet, but failed to penetrate. The duel had become a deadly dance. Seconds between life and death. The kill shot. In the chaos, the Pershing's gunner, Clarence Smoyer, steadied his breathing. He adjusted his aim just slightly lower. Load, armor-piercing. The loader rammed around into the breach. The gun fired again. The shell hit the Panther just below the turret ring, the weakest point in its armor. A flash of orange burst from the tank's side, then silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then flames began to rise from the Panther's engine deck. The crew never escaped. The moment caught on film unbeknownst to either crew. The entire battle was being captured by a U.S. Army cameraman positioned nearby, Jim Bates of the Signal Corps. The footage, grainy and gray, would become one of the most famous tank duels ever filmed. A real combat encounter, not a reconstruction. Not propaganda. The moment one era of tank warfare ended and another began. In the film, you can still see the Panther's gun glowing faintly from the heat of firing. You can see the smoke, the debris, the flicker of flame consuming the steel giant. A single duel, lasting less than 3 minutes, but symbolizing years of struggle, evolution and sacrifice. Aftermath. When the smoke cleared, Cologne was finished. German resistance collapsed. The last defenders either surrendered or vanished into the ruins. The Pershing rolled forward slowly, its gun still hot, its crew silent. They had won the duel. But around them, the destruction was absolute. In the shadow of the cathedral, both victors and vanquished seemed small, caught in the machinery of history, each just another piece of the war's vast design. Reflections. The duel at Cologne was not just a clash of tanks, it was a passing of the torch. The Panther, Germany's masterpiece of engineering, represented precision, pride, and tragedy. The Pershing, America's response, symbolized adaptation, innovation, and overwhelming production power. Both were marvels of their time. But only one nation could sustain its creations. As the war moved east toward Berlin, the Panther's legend faded into history. The Pershing and its descendants, the Patton, the Abrams, would go on to define the next century of armored warfare. The end of the war. 2 months later, Germany surrendered. The Panthers that survived were silent, rusting in fields and forests across Europe, captured by Allied engineers, studied and dismantled. They revealed both brilliance and folly, over-engineered for a war that demanded endurance, not elegance. The Pershing, meanwhile, rolled into Berlin with the victorious armies. It had come too late to change the war, but just in time to change the future. The ruins of Cologne still stand today, the cathedral scarred but unbroken. Tourists walk the same streets where 2 tanks once fought to the death. And if you listen closely when the wind is right, you can almost hear it. The echo of steel against steel, of men trapped in history's final duel. The Panther was born in fire. The Pershing ended it. The age of the tiger had passed. The world was already preparing for a new kind of war. April 1945. Berlin, the heart of the Third Reich. Once the symbol of Nazi power, it now lay in ruins, smoldering, broken and surrounded. From every direction, the Red Army was closing in. To the east, the First Belarusian Front under Zhukov. To the south, Konev's First Ukrainian Front. And to the west, the Allies, watching, waiting. Within the city, what remained of Germany's armored might prepared for its final stand. The ghosts of the Panzerwaffe. By April, the once feared Panzerwaffe was a shadow of its former self. The divisions that had once thundered across Europe now existed only on paper. Their tanks destroyed, their fuel gone, their crews dead or scattered. But a few remained. At Tempelhof, Moabit and the Tiergarten, a handful of tigers and panthers waited. Machines of war turned into instruments of desperation. Among them, the 502nd Heavy Panzer Battalion, commanded by Oberleutnant Otto Carius, and remnants of the Müncheberg Panzer Division, led by Major Thilo von Westernhagen. They knew what awaited them. They were not fighting for victory anymore. They were fighting for time, for honor, and for the ghost of a nation already gone. The Red Storm. At dawn on April 16th, the Soviets began their final assault. Over 9,000 guns and rocket launchers opened fire across the Oder River line. A bombardment so intense that even veterans of Stalingrad were shaken. The sky turned red. The earth trembled. And within the chaos, Soviet tanks surged forward, T-34-85s, IS-2s, and self-propelled guns rolling through smoke and fire. German defenders watched from their bunkers, dazed, deafened, and exhausted. For them, this was the apocalypse. Inside the city, by April 21st, the first Soviet tanks entered the outskirts of Berlin. The city had become a labyrinth of rubble and flames. Every street was a fortress, every intersection a battlefield. Civilians huddled in cellars as panzer crews took up ambush positions between crumbling walls. They painted their tanks with camouflage of dust and ash, their tracks muffled with rags to hide from Soviet spotters. Fuel was so scarce that many tanks became stationary bunkers, their engines silent, their guns fixed on choke points. One Panther, turret number 101, sat beneath the Brandenburg Gate. Its crew, 5 young men barely out of training, waited in silence. They knew they would not leave this place alive. "We fight for the men beside us," one of them wrote in his pocket diary. Not for Hitler, not for Germany, just for each other. The last Tiger on April 26th near the Tiergarten, one of the last operational Tiger IIs, the dreaded King Tiger, took up position beside the Reich Chancellery. Commanded by Unterscharführer Georg Diers, the tank had only 3 shells left. When Soviet T-34s appeared down the avenue, Diers waited, his gunner holding his breath. The first shot struck a T-34 and blew it apart. The second hit another squarely in the turret, but then a wave of IS-2s returned fire. The King Tiger's engine roared as it reversed behind a burning tram. Its heavy armor shrugged off several hits, but its luck could not last. A Soviet shell pierced the side plate, igniting the ammunition rack. The Tiger exploded in a ball of flame. Diers and his driver escaped, burned and half-deafened. Behind them, the once mighty Tiger burned, its final battle fought in the ruins of the city it was built to defend. The Hitler Youth and the Old Guard. As the Red Army pushed deeper into the city, resistance grew more fragmented and more tragic. Teenagers of the Hitler Youth, armed with Panzerfausts, fought alongside old men from the Volkssturm, many wearing World War I medals on tattered uniforms. They fought bravely, but hopelessly, destroying Soviet tanks at close range, only to be crushed moments later. By the third day, the air stank of gunpowder and death. Every building burned. Every street was littered with wrecks. The Panthers of the Müncheberg Division made their last stand near Potsdamer Platz. Outnumbered and surrounded, they fired until their barrels glowed red. When their ammo ran out, the crews destroyed their own tanks to keep them from capture. The end in the bunker beneath the burning city. In the Führerbunker, Adolf Hitler ranted and raved, moving imaginary divisions that no longer existed. Above him, What was left of the Panzerwaffe died fighting. By April 30th, the Soviets had reached the Reichstag. German soldiers, engineers, and tankers fought room to room, snipers firing from the galleries as Red Army flags crept higher up the shattered facade. That same day, deep underground, Hitler ended his life. And with him the Reich, silence after the storm. When the guns finally fell silent, Berlin was unrecognizable. A city once home to 4 million people had become a wasteland. Thousands of wrecked tanks and vehicles littered the streets. Tigers, Panthers, Shermans, T-34s, and all twisted together in death. The Soviets had lost more than 80,000 men in the battle. The Germans, perhaps twice as many. The last Panther was found near the Spree River out of fuel, its crew gone. The turret was turned west, as if still waiting for the enemy who never came. Legacy of the Panzer. The Panzerwaffe, once the most feared armored force in the world, had ended where it began, in the heart of Europe, amid fire and ruin. Its legacy was complex, a blend of innovation and fanaticism, of engineering genius and moral catastrophe. The Panther and the Tiger had changed warfare forever, but their brilliance could not save a nation built on destruction. In the end, their steel outlasted their cause, a new dawn. In the months that followed, the Allies dismantled what remained of the German war machine. Factories were silent, fields overgrown with wreckage, but the lessons of Berlin would echo through generations. Tank designers from every nation studied the Panthers and Tigers, their sloped armor, their guns, their flaws. The next generation of tanks, the M46 Patton, the T-54, the Centurion, all bore the fingerprints of those who fought and died in 1945. The world was entering a new era, one where the next war would not be fought with tanks in the streets, but with ideology, science, and fear. The Cold War had begun. The fall of Berlin was not just the end of a war. It was the end of an age when nations believed that steel and fire could decide the fate of humanity, when courage met cruelty, and machines became legends. In the ruins of Berlin, those legends died. But their echoes remain. In every battlefield, every museum, every story told to this day. The Tiger roared its last in Berlin. The Panther fell beside it, and from their ashes rose the modern world.